Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, so today we have Betty, but before we get into anything else, Betty, we need to know if you are prepared to engage.
Prepared and ready to engage.
Let's do this, Betty. Betty.Adamou, is that the right way to pronounce it?
Yeah, perfect.
So Betty.Adamou is the founder of Research Through Gaming. She's also the author of Games and Gamification in Market Research and a serious game designer specializing in market research and marketing. She is the inventor of ResearchGames, which is a new research methodology where she designs games as instruments for consumer research on behalf of Fortune 500 brands. She's frequently invited to give keynote presentations and university guest lectures to share her business cases, expertise, and research to, of course, a global audience. Research Through Gaming is based in the UK, where she is located, and since its inception in 2011, she has worked with a diverse range of global brands and has been in the grid of top 50 most innovative firms twice. So very exciting, Betty, and very privileged to have you here today with the Engagers. So is there anything that we missed from that intro that we should know?
Well, you know what? I mean, I don't want to take up the interview time. Kind of just, we're in a world where lots of people have many, many different skills and, we could all be here forever. So I think I'll just leave it at that. That was a very kind introduction. Thank you, Rob. And it's lovely to be on your podcast.
Oh,
Thank
fantastic.
you for inviting me.
Happy. I think we were talking about the pre-interview for a long while. We've been following each other on social media. And,
we have.
Well, it's. I think it's a good time now to be finally almost physically connecting, because this is the nearest we sometimes get to meeting some of the people personally. But I do think in the future we will do something either in Madrid, in London, or anywhere in the world where we are.
For sure, absolutely. Well, actually, Rob, I live about an hour and a half's drive north of London. I am a Londoner, through and through. I grew up in London, but moved to what a lot of Londoners would describe as the countryside. I'm in the East Anglian coast in a place called Suffolk, which is very beautiful and green and by the beach. So actually, if you found yourself in the UK, I would say, well, go up a little bit ahead of London, go up a bit north and experience a different side of the UK that you might not have seen before, and to give you a tour. Yes.
Absolutely. I was in Oxford and I loved as well the whole feel of being
beautiful.
Near the countryside and all those things. Very, very interesting place.
Yeah. Totally.
So Betty, the first thing that we would like to know is, because when we get here, our guests, just like yourself, our guests tend to be very interesting people who are doing a lot of things. And sometimes our listeners might feel that these are people who are like unreachable in a way. And, we have it all figured out. And we want to know what a regular day looks like. Like, what do you do what does being Betty look like?
I think if I was to just pick out like just what I was doing today. Okay, so right now it's almost 7 p.m. in the evening here where I am in the UK, and today actually I have been doing the graphic designs for a new research game that I'm developing for an alcoholic beverages Fortune 500 brand, and while doing that, I'm also kind of, taking the graphics that I'm making in Photoshop and putting them in a PowerPoint presentation to create a storyboard for my client. I've got a big presentation with them next week. Kind of, I have shown them some of the concepts that I've developed so far, some of the kind of big ideas for the research game is going to look like, the kind of questions and scenarios that we'll have. And so, now I'm kind of finalizing, polishing that design, putting it in a storyboard to present to them next week. But, there is a lot involved with that process, because even while I'm designing the graphics and creating the storyboard, there's a huge amount of detail that's kind of going on in the back end that on the surface people might not realize. So, you're constantly thinking about the user's experience. Do I design this screen with a button on the left of the screen or the center of the screen, because what's going to be the easier interaction, and is the way I'm designing this going to work on a mobile device as well as like a laptop or a tablet. So even as you're designing and you're thinking about the aesthetic, you're thinking about, in my case, you're thinking about the research and the data quality and all of those things. There's also that big kind of user experience, device agnostic ability going on in the thinking at the same time. And actually, going back to a little bit more to your question in terms of kind of a typical day, like every day is different, because even before I started the process of doing the graphic design for this new game and coming up with the concepts, I spent a long time researching this particular part of the industry for my client, without revealing too much because it is confidential. They have many different types of alcoholic beverages and brands, and this is particular for the Scotch whiskey market. And do you know, Rob, I mean, I do like a whiskey, but I've learned so much about Scotch whiskey and mixology and cocktail making, like just kind of this intense cramming. I do feel like I've been studying this industry on a really intense level for the past kind of 2 weeks in preparation to come up with this game design, because I really feel that, and I'm sure that lots of designers will say the same thing, right? When you're going to design any digital interface, you want to know who your user's going to be, right? You want to know their average age, where they are in the world when they're accessing your digital content, what's their lifestyle like. You want to get into their head, right?
Betty, I'm going to interrupt you very quickly because I'm going to jump ahead to one or two questions that we usually do it more further into the interview. But you're talking about what your thought process looks like and when you're thinking about creating these games look like. So I wanted to actually know, like, is there any sort of structure that you usually use when you're heading into these projects? And if so, what is that structure, process, or ideas? How do you come up with all these things? What does it look like?
Yeah, again, a really good question. So whenever I'm given a brief by a client, it will be, they'll talk about what their research objectives are and how that relates to their business needs. So I'm just going to give a very generic example. You might be a brand that wants to research what people think about a new food product that you're looking at putting on the market. And obviously the research data you get back from that survey or focus group or whatever you might use as a methodology, that data is going to then inform how you may create the packaging or balance the flavors or whatever it might be. And then that's obviously the research objectives linking to the business need. So when my clients give me that information as part of the project brief, I also ask for them to give me as much information as they can on what they know about their consumer market already. And whether I get that part of the information or not, I still do my own really quite extensive and intense research. So as I just mentioned slightly earlier, I really try to get into the mindset of my research participants, because they could be people that I kind of know in terms of, I've got similar types of people in my friendship group or my family, or they can be people that are kind of really outside of my world. And so I really do have to make an effort to understand who these people are. So going back to the example of the Scotch whiskey market, bartenders who are serving Scotch whiskey, consumers who like Scotch whiskey, this is something that's not necessarily part of my world. So I've done a lot of intense research, and that understanding about who my participants are, what they already think about a certain subject, what are some of their kind of outlooks on what I'm going to be asking them. All of that knowledge is really crucial in helping me build the most engaging research game I possibly can. And actually, I can't develop a research game without those two things. So without my clients' research objectives and their business needs, and that research I do where I understand the participants on a kind of really deep level.
So I would say that's starting off by understanding what's the objective in general of the whole research and what they're looking for. And of course, understanding your players, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll spend time doing things like following the relevant hashtags on Instagram, on Twitter, the influencers who are maybe talking about a certain subject that's relating to my client's research needs. And I think that is such like that secondary research, if you like, or even primary research as well, is a really valuable tool. So in a way, although I'm developing a tool that is a research product, a research game is an instrument for market research, I feel that it's necessary to do research before I go into that research game design, because it's just going to help me build a much more engaging, value-driven research experience for the participants. And ultimately, that is what is going to help my client, right? Because the more engaged my participants are, the more focused and attentive they are, the better quality data my client will get, because people are really thinking about what they're saying, right? They're really thinking about the creativity they're putting into the game or the simulations or the scenarios we're putting forward. And that all has benefited my clients in the past. So that's in a nutshell my process. So, I start off with that research, and then I go into the design and development stages. And once my client has approved the research game design as a storyboard, as just kind of graphics, then I go into the programming and playtesting stage, which I'm very heavily involved with. So even though I'm not a coder, Rob, I do understand, enough where I can, manage a team of programmers, be very heavily involved in playtesting, troubleshoot where needed, and that kind of thing.
I had a question, because I think it's an interesting. We always talk about the importance of playtesting, but I think in your case, it pans out in a different way. What in general, like in very general terms, what does playtesting look like for a research game?
Yeah, so with playtesting, as you know, Rob, in the entertainment games circle, you're doing things like looking out for bugs, looking out for errors in text. You're looking out for all of those things, as well as, does this game play on all the major browsers, the most modern browser updates, or going back X amount of years and being device agnostic. So playtesting a research game does all of those things, but I'm also playtesting on an additional level where I'm making sure that the data that people are inputting into the research game is coming through in the back-end data collection software, where that research data is held securely, and that's what gets exported and given to my client, so that obviously they're getting the data from the research game. And so the playtesting process is intense, it's detailed, but what is really interesting is that my clients, who are typically involved in using traditional online surveys for their research, they want to get involved in the playtesting process. Like, they're so eager to see the research game design come to life that, when they first kind of were wanting to get involved, when I first started the company, I thought, wow, this is really unusual, because in other market research jobs, I never really had that. But it was just really great to see them want to get involved in that process and spend time giving feedback or making suggestions to maybe kind of evolve the design even more or something like that. And so the playtesting doesn't just involve me and my programming team and some carefully selected kind of playtesters in my community, but also my clients as well, which is really useful.
Fantastic. And so I'm guessing it's primarily focused on functional things, like is this working on, as you mentioned, like on the typical, is it working on all the platforms? Are there any bugs? And that includes, of course, whether the data is being collected correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. So now we want to make a shift, Betty, because we also, as I mentioned before, we have all of our guests on a pedestal because our guests are absolutely amazing, as you are, Betty, and you're doing amazing work.
Thank you. That's very kind to hear.
Absolutely. So you're all doing amazing work, but it doesn't mean that you got it all figured out every single time, or that you even have it all figured out. It means there's a lot of
yes.
There's a lot of failure as well in our careers and in the way that we work, and that's something that actually makes us become every time a little bit better, and that makes that our products not be just a good attempt, something that just worked the first time. So I want to know a story that you can tell us as far as you can, because I know there's many NDAs in the industry, but with as much detail as it's possible. Can you tell us a story of what you would call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning with one of your projects? Take us as far as you can into the ground level. We want to be there with you, understand what happened. What did you learn from it, or how did you come out? And, take us there.
Okay. All right. This is a really good question, and one that I haven't actually been asked before. So that's nice as well. My favorite fail. Okay. Right. I'm just going to tell you what first comes to mind. And I do wear my heart on my sleeve. So I'm going to be really honest, but kind of censor some of the names. So a couple of years ago now, I was creating a research game design for a Fortune 500 brand, a really great brand that a lot of people know and love. And I certainly know and love this brand as well. And there were some parts in the legal documentation that we were trying to share between us. Because, with these big companies, right, they have their legal kind of documents and they're bulletproof, right? So smaller companies, they've got no chance, right, in trying to kind of send their own agreements. So you're kind of like forced to sign their own and things like that. And, I think there was something that wasn't entirely clear. And this particular client, without me, in no malicious way whatsoever, kind of took the design and got it created, like program and coded, and managed as a research project with another company. And even though I was, for want of a better term, compensated financially for that, it really, at that time, I felt I took it personally, like, oh my God, they took my design and, they have a whole other company making it and programming it and playtesting it and managing it as a research project. And I enjoy that part of the process. But I think the reason why maybe it's my favorite failure is because I learned so much from that. I learned that not to take it personally. I know that as an artist at heart, I can't be so precious about my design work, right? At the end of the day, it's a tool that clients need. It's a means to an end. And the other part of me was thinking as well, actually, well, is that such a bad thing? Is it such a bad thing for me to be this ideas person who creates these really interesting concepts and these research game designs, and maybe somebody else gets to code it and make it, and I don't have to manage that? Because although I enjoy that process, is it my favorite part of the process? And the answer to that is probably not. So actually, it took my business structure in a slightly different way that has been for the better. And actually, it's meant that I have been able to offer my more recent clients in the last 2 years a kind of more stagnated approach, where I've been able to say, actually, do you just want to design, or do you want to design with the coding and the managing of the research project, like a full service approach? And that's allowed some of my clients to go, yeah, I want design only, or yeah, I want the full service approach. And it's actually created much more flexibility for me. So that is definitely like a really good learning curve that I had, that felt maybe like a failure at the time, but I like all good failures, right? You have to sit down, learn from it, really try to be objective, find that silver lining, which I think I safe to say that I think I have found that silver lining, and it's taught me a lesson, and it's worked out better, actually.
Absolutely. In fact, I would like to pull two very, very different things from your story. Some of them are related to what you said, and some are not that related. The first one is, of course, that what you mentioned, that it is about not everything has to be done by you. And I think this applies very much to a lot of people that are listening to this podcast. Like, you see all these designs, and first off, not everything has, and we've mentioned this before, not every single gamification or game research or game has to be completely digital or even digital at all. So there's things that you can do by yourself, and that you maybe want to cut up some cardboard and do some things and do a physical design, which works just as well. It can work very, very well if you do your research, if you do your work. It can work very, very well as well. But the other thing related to that is, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Yu-Kai Chao and the Octalysis group.
Yes.
As the last time I spoke to him, one of the things that they decided that they wouldn't do is do the whole programming and managing the project. They literally deliver their design, and that has, with the good and the bad that means. I mean, they are the experts in one thing. They hone down on that. They're growing in that sense, or they were growing at that point in that sense. I don't know if they've changed or shifted, but they were doing phenomenally well with that. So it is a possibility that you don't have to get hands-on with every single thing, and that leads a little bit more to the entrepreneurial side that I also love to touch every once in a while, which is about, where are you delivering the most value, Betty? And that might be the question of after learning that result. Are you adding the most value to that? Maybe in the future you will consider having somebody who manages the project in the future, so that those clients who are interested in that, you will be somewhat involved, but maybe not in the daily struggle and in the every single detail, everything that's happening. Maybe not every decision has to go by you, and maybe maybe, I'm not saying it is, but maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I told that story as my favorite failure, because a short time after that happened, I spoke to a couple of my mentors. We had this very deep discussion in a pub in London. We met up, I told them everything that happened. And, initially I was very upset. Like I said, I took it all very personally. And, kind of speaking to them, they're much older and not much older, but older and wiser than me. They were able to kind of be that important mirror to say, well, is it such a bad thing that you're not overseeing the programming and the playtesting part of it, and that they got someone else to do it? And yeah, that's what made me walk away and go, actually, you're right. And it was a real turning point for me, and the kind of the way that the business has worked in the last couple of years from that experience has certainly evolved. And back to your comment about the kind of, where do you add value? I think it's such an important thing for any listener, whether they're interested in gamification or not, just to think about where they add value and what really sparks passion. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of ikigai, Rob, at all.
Nope.
So ikigai is a Japanese concept that describes your kind of true calling. And if anybody was to Google ikigai, they would see this kind of very interesting Venn diagram that basically tries to cover your thinking about kind of, well, how you're going to help the world, how you're going to help yourself, how you're going to help people who are close to you, what you're passionate about. And basically, when you start to overlap all these things, there should be a thing that you do in the center of it all that is your ikigai, the thing that you do that's really kind of to your true meaning. And, I have always felt like an artist at heart. But that process really kind of showed me that what I enjoy the most about the creative output isn't only the artistry, it's design, which is a very different approach. I love the problem solving. I love the concept development. I love sitting there chewing the end of my pencil, thinking about, like, God, how am I going to make this thing work? And then having that eureka moment. I love the design part of it. And so for me, whether I apply my ikigai as a designer to research games for market research or marketing, or consulting with clients for serious game development in other ways, that is really my true calling. And it took that favorite failure for me to really sit down and think about that, because I ended up buying that book about ikigai, right? And just being like, my God, this thing is just absolutely mind blowing, right?
I think failure has its way of reaching us, and that failure is extremely useful in our lives in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And like your comment earlier about because we do it right, we see people on social media who have more followers than us and who are TED speakers and so on, and we're like, oh my God, we want to get to that stage. But equally, there might be people in our social networks who are looking at us as influencers, and like you say, they think that we've got it all figured out. And maybe to a large degree, because people have their stuff sorted out in different ways, right? But as long as you're still learning and evolving your craft or yourself, you're on the right path, and there isn't, and nobody who's listening to any of your podcasts, Rob, or indeed any other podcast out there, should feel like, I can't get there, because we all started out in the same space.
There's this phrase I've heard it many times from John Lee Dumas, a podcaster as well. He and I've mentioned him several times in this podcast. I don't think I'll add anything to his fame because it's quite famous. But
right, okay.
People will realize I do admire him quite a bit. He says that you should only compare yourself to yourself yesterday, and that's if you're winning that battle, then you're winning. I mean, that's the place to go, and that's the reference that you should look for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the difference between being inspired by people versus kind of looking at people and feeling a sense of like, I'm not good enough because I'm not there yet, right? Like, be inspired by those people, let what they're doing maybe drive you to work harder and stronger and play more and learn more. But yeah, don't ever like let it make you fall down. I mean, it's such an interesting thing you brought up, Rob, because there is a woman that I know in the market research industry who I greatly admire. And there's me thinking that she's got it all figured out. She's a VC. She's on a board of a conference. An incredible woman and so down to earth. And I've built such a lovely rapport with her in a short space of time. And today she asked me for my advice on something that I thought she like came second nature to her, about kind of how she might describe herself on social media profiles, to really capture the essence of who she is and what she does. Because as you know, Rob, nowadays we don't just do one thing. People do many different things, right? And I was really taken aback by that. I mean, I was so glad that she asked me for my advice, and I was really flattered, and that was great. But it's that thing of where you look up to someone, you think they've got it all figured out. But actually, there's so many things that we don't know, and that we could offer people guidance that we perceive are kind of higher up than us. And
Absolutely.
We don't think that they've got those gaps in knowledge, but maybe they do. We can help each other out.
It is. And in that same sense of thinking, now shifting towards, I don't know, this question that we always have, because you're talking about take advice from other people, and we would like to get some advice from you, because we would like to know if there's any sort of best practice or anything that you think that any game-inspired project or serious game, gamification, any of these things could be benefited from it. I mean, it could be anything that you think of. Is there such a thing as a best practice, some element, some strategy that you think would be very useful for almost any project?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a few, but what I'll do is try to stick to one thing. So
fantastic.
In my book that you kindly mentioned earlier, Rob, it's called Games and Gamification in Market Research. And actually, I think that it is a book that could be read by anyone who is creating digital content, because I talk about how you can borrow from what games teach us to give value to your users, whether they're your users, traffic on a website, research participants on an online survey, whatever those users are. And what I did was I spent some time in my research of games and serious games of gamification, kind of distilling 4 value types that games give us. Because if you really boil it down, games give us knowledge value. We're learning something about new environments. We're learning something about other people. We're learning something about a different subject that we might not know about. So there's that element of knowledge value. There's a self-discovery value with games as well. Like, I'm learning something about myself, my patience, my perseverance, my creativity, my collaboration with others. You've also got narrative value. So the value you get out of an engaging story. There's also transcendent value. So the value that you can give people to let them know that they're part of something bigger than themselves. So those four values: knowledge value, narrative value, transcendent value, and self-discovery value. If you can give those four pieces of value to anybody, it doesn't really matter if you're gamifying a process or not. If you can give people that value, they're going to be intrinsically engaged. And as you know, Rob, that term intrinsic engagement, it has such a kind of heavy and important meaning in our industry because of the many kind of behavioral benefits that arise from intrinsic engagement. People are more attentive, they're more focused, it creates a continuation, a completion desire. And if you think about it, there are hundreds of industries that need that, right?
Yes.
Engagement is king, and we need engagement in education, in employee training, in social media, whatever the subject is, we need that intrinsic engagement. And those four value types that I've identified are really key. And you know what? It's not even just a thing that I research and put in my book for the sake of it. I actually have these things that I've put in my book. I actually have a lot of the processes printed out that are blue tacked to my wall, so that every time I'm designing a research game, I genuinely, I ask myself, well, where am I offering self-discovery value to my research participants? And what kind of self-discovery value is going to be really important to this particular group of people? I'm thinking about their age.
You're walking the talk in that sense. You're using your own advice for your daily design.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which was inspired in games. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean,
so we would like to know, Betty, in that same sense, what is your favorite game?
Oh, what's my favorite game? Oh,
that's a tough one. Always.
It is a really tough one. What's my favorite game? Does it have to be a digital game?
Nope, of course not.
Okay. Well, I mean, I have favorite games depending on if I'm playing alone or with other people. So I love playing Scrabble with my husband. I've loved playing Monopoly with my nephews. And solo, I love playing World of Warcraft. I really do. I know, that's proper, nerd level, but I love WoW. And yeah, just could literally play it until 4 a.m. and be starving hungry and then still not shut my laptop down. So yeah, I know that's not one game, but maybe there's a little variety there that might inspire people.
That's absolutely fantastic, Betty. Well, we've been talking about inspiration and inspiring people, and after listening to these questions, feeling the vibe of the interview in Professor Game, is there anybody that comes to your mind that you would like to listen to interviewed in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
So Dr. Rachel Laws is a market research colleague of mine. So I only actually met her about a year or two ago, so kind of fairly recently in terms of my career in this industry. And she is a semiotician. She is very knowledgeable about games as well. She actually writes for a publication called Game Byte, and she is much more of a serious gamer than I am. And I think she would be just a very interesting person to have on your show as well. So if you need an introduction, just let me know.
Yes, we will talk about that after the show. So Rachel Law, right?
Rachel Laws, Lawes.
Oh, Laws. Fantastic, yep. Fantastic. Well, we'll be looking into that profile for sure. And in the same sense of recommendations, if you had to recommend to this audience, to the engagers, one book, what book would that be and why?
One book. Okay, well, I'm not going to say my book.
Of course, yours is already recommended. It definitely is.
One of the books that really inspired me very early in my career, actually, this is probably one of the key things I read before I started my business, was Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal, which I'm sure is a book that has been mentioned thousands upon thousands of times in our industry. But, there are so many ideas in there, so many good business cases. She's a very engaging writer as well, is Jane. And yeah, I mean, I would say If you haven't heard of Jane McGonigal, she's got a lot of books out there, a lot of TED Talks, a lot of content online. But start with Reality is Broken, because it's really an eye-opener to, the impact that games are having on the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've been mentioning a few recommendations from other people, but now we want to know, Betty, what would you say is your sweet spot, your superpower when creating games for research?
Empathy. Definitely. I think my husband describes me as an empath, so I don't know how much of a good or a bad thing that is. I have always had the ability to really put myself in other people's shoes. So when I'm doing my research about who my participants are going to be, right? That information, as I said, it drives my research game design. I feel like I'm really getting inside their heads in as creepy as that sounds, in a not creepy way whatsoever. Like, I really try to understand who they are, and I feel confident that by the time I've done my research and I'm at the design stage, I do know who they are. I feel like that I've built some kind of connection. I can put myself in their shoes. I can almost imagine their lifestyle, what they're doing when they wake up to when they go to sleep. I really get to understand them very well. And so, yeah, I think that empathy there is what drives the design I have, and gives it meaning for people ultimately, and gives it value that makes it important for them. And that's why they enjoy playing the research games.
Fantastic. That's super, super useful. But Betty, we're arriving to the end of this interview. Time flies absolutely by when we're doing these things and talking about gamification in games. But we don't want to let you go without you giving any final piece of advice you might want to give to the engagers, letting us know where we can find all of your things, social media, webpage, of course, your book. Anything else before we call it a game over?
Sure, yeah. Well, if you are interested in connecting with me, please do follow me on Twitter @Betty.Adamou. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. My book, you can find out lots about it on the Book Companion website, which also has a bit of an Easter egg. So the book actually gives you a code to unlock a secret part of the website that gives you extra content, like videos and so on. And that companion website is www.gamesandgamification.com. And you can also check out what my company does by looking at researchthroughgaming.com.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that connection. Is there any final piece of advice you want to leave us with? We've shared quite a bit. It's not for lack of it, for sure.
Yeah, sure. I've been teaching what I do as well as doing what I do for almost a decade now. And whenever I'm in a room of students or adults, they always kind of have such a trepidation in approaching gamification design. They'll say things like, "Oh, but I'm not very creative," and "Oh, well, I don't really play games anymore." And I think if you just take the time to understand the key principles of serious game and gamification design, and set yourself a timer of 20 minutes, literally just 20 minutes, and just brainstorm some ideas of how you're going to design a game or a gamified platform that solves whatever problem it is that you have, you will be really surprised at what you can develop. And the reason I can almost guarantee that you will create something interesting is because I've been playing a game called 20 for 20 for 10 years in workshops and in seminars and in keynote speeches, where I literally give people 20 minutes to design a game to a project brief. And the ideas that have come out just always leave me stunned every single time, whether the person in the room, that they're as young as kind of 15, 16 to whether they're 65 plus. So don't doubt yourself, but do give yourself some time. And it is a craft, right? As you know as well, Rob, just like many other things. You're not going to get it right the first time round. I mean, I look back at research games I developed 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and most of it I'm kind of proud, but there are some bits where I really cringe and think, God, I would do that differently now. So you're always going to be learning. But the key is just to kind of be bold and make those first steps.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that I think those two key things, both taking the bold step and going for it, and not limiting yourself by saying you are or are not creative. I think
sure, yeah,
there's many ways to learn and to move forward with that. But Betty, our time for today, at least, it's up. Thank you very much for spending this time with the engagers. We really enjoyed this. I think there was a lot of good advice, a lot of insights that you gave us. So there's many more things that we could look into. But for now and for today, it's time to say that it's game over.
Thank you so much, Rob. Take care.
Hey Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Betty, then go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started into our email list. That way, we can be in contact and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know what's happening in the world of game thinking with Amy Jo Kim and her upcoming Game Thinking Masterclass? Then all you have to do is listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.